Instead of a letter Daled like a D, it's like a R, like a Resh. There was once a family who took a trip to Israel. They were building a beautiful 10,000 square feet home with 45 doorposts in their home. And they were in Israel during the tour, and the tour guide was talking to them about the great mitzvah of having a mezuzah. He was so inspired. He purchased 45 beautiful mezuzahs. Now, a real good mezuzah, average cost starts at $50, $75. A real good mezuzah could go up to $300. He did not spare any expenses, but to buy from the finest mezuzahs. He bought 45 of the most expensive mezuzahs. And he had them all put into their cases, and he shipped them off to his home, to the contractor, and he gave the contractor exact instructions how to place the mezuzah on the doorposts. He's so excited. What an investment. I'm going to welcome God into our house. We're going to have 45 beautiful mezuzahs. He finishes his trip in Israel. He comes back home and he meets his contractor, looks at the beautiful house, and he sees the mezuzahs are hanging exactly perfectly where they're supposed to be. And he looks at the contractor, he says, "Wow, you did such a beautiful job. The house is so beautiful. And I want to thank you so much for putting up those mezuzahs for me." He says, wasn't a problem. I got them when you sent them to Israel. But as soon as I got them, I looked inside them. I saw the instructions. So I figured you told me already what to do. So I threw out all those instructions. Which means he threw out all those $300 parchments that the contractor thought they were instructions. Let me share with you why mezuzah is actually near and dear to me personally. When I was about 12 years old, that was in 1973. It was my first exposure to terror in Israel. There was a city in northern Israel called Ma'alot. And I was listening to the radio. And my father, may he rest in peace, was listening to the radio, and I was there. And I heard the live report from Jay Brzezinski, I believe was the reporter, who was reporting live on the scene of what was unfolding. What happened was a group of terrorists took siege of a high school in the city Ma'alot. And they took the students as hostages. And the Israeli army went on a daring mission to rescue the hostages. I remember as a very impressionable 12-year-old listening as it's unfolding. I'm hearing the gunshots, I'm hearing the screaming, I'm hearing the prayers. Someone was praying the words from Genesis, "May the angel protect the children." Sadly, there were some fatalities amongst the high school students, but many were rescued. After this terrible event, my Rabbi Schneerson, the world Jewish leader, dispatched some of his students who was living in northern Israel and suggested that they go to the high school and they check the mezuzot that are on the rooms where these children were, and to see if those mezuzot were still valid, were they still kosher, or have they deteriorated, have they dried up. And an interesting finding happened, that the rooms that the children were fatally killed, their mezuzah were not kosher. There is something wrong. Either the case was empty, or the mezuzah itself was invalid. Thus, the world Jewish leader, Rabbi Schneerson, launched a worldwide campaign of awareness that everyone should check their current mezuzot that they have to see if it is still valid. Because many of times when we purchase a mezuzah, we put it on our doorposts and we set it and forget it, and we forget about it. We didn't even think twice that sometimes they become invalid. Sometimes they dry up. Sometimes the sun bakes on them and actually burns the parchment. Thus, the door no longer has a mezuzah on it. This was in 1973 when the mezuzah campaign was launched. Let me conclude with a story I heard many years ago from a rabbi, Meir Greenberg, from New Jersey. He was contacted by one of his congregants that something happened with their teenage daughter, that she decided to go astray from Judaism and become an idol worshiper. And the parents were so beside themselves. How could their daughter do this? So the rabbi said, I'm going to pen a letter to the world-renowned Rabbi Schneerson, and we're going to tell him your daughter's story and ask him for a blessing and for advice. So the father pens a 5-page letter, sends it off to Brooklyn, New York, to the Rebbe's office. The Rebbe receives the letter. Short while later, Rabbi Greenberg gets a call from the Rebbe's office, says, there's an answer from the Rebbe for this congregant of yours. The Rebbe recommends that you check the mezuzah on their home. Make sure that the mezuzahs are kosher and properly placed. The rabbi calls up and makes an appointment, comes down to the house and talks to the father, and the father says, hey, I recently bought new mezuzahs. We have all beautiful mezuzahs in our home. They're all kosher, they're fresh, they're kosher. We had them checked. Rabbi Greenberg says, if the Rebbe says to check him, then you ought to check him. Again, he says, but I just did them. He said, all of them? He says, I took all the mezuzahs down from our house. And he says, every single one? Did you make sure you got every single one? And he remembered himself. He remembered that in the basement, there's one door that he actually forgot to check that mezuzah. That is actually the door that the daughter would oftenly leave the house from, as she has distanced herself from her parents. So Rabbi Greenberg goes down with him, and they take the mezuzah off the doorpost. And Rabbi Greenberg begins reading the word Shema Yisroel. He sees that the last word, which should read Echad, which means one, actually the last letter is instead of a letter Daled like a D, it's like a R, like a Resh, which means, Hear, O Israel, God our God, God is another God. That one letter changes a Hebrew word from one to another, which means that this girl began seeking another God. What happened was the mezuzah that she was going out of was not kosher, represented another God, and that affected her spiritual being. When I heard this story, I appreciated how synchronized we are with the mezuzah on our doorposts. God bless you. God loves you.